Thank you. I wish I'd got a picture of you all waving, because my camera's over there. Could you all just wave? Hello, Malmo. Thank you. That's professional, isn't it? It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me. As Julia said, I run Smithery. We're in London. We're a strategic design unit. We help companies make things people want rather than making people want things. And today is, as a bit of a prologue. The prologue. That's a very British joke. You won't get that. The prologue. It's what Dan Dennett calls the philosopher's favourite tactic of going meta. So adding the prefix meta onto the front of things to explore what's behind them, what's on top of them, what are the sort of the layers above and below, and what's actually going on. So you will all, I guess, know sort of have heard of metadata or know what it is. It's sort of like, rather than the data that is generated by a user, for instance, it's the data about who is that user, what is in the spreadsheet, what are the columns, etc. So it's the data about the data. Or perhaps Metacritic might use that to say, well, there are all these scores, but what is the score of scores? What's the score about scores on top? What's the next level up? And meta is a really useful thing. It's the monkey wrench of abstract thinking. It's something that you can just take and pour onto something and go, I wonder what else is happening here. And it's something that it works as a tactic, as a trick. It works quite a lot. Over just about anything you can do, there's always another layer, always another level. In fact, as Dennett says, anything you can do, I can do meta. And there are two big benefits I see personally in this idea of going meta. One is you think differently. So suddenly, rather than looking at the thing, you're obliquely looking around it and above it. And secondly, you find out who's been here before. You found out other people that have used this trick and how they've explored a subject and a topic in an area. So it's something, this is the third time I've done it. First of all was last year at a conference called Deconstruct in Brighton. I did a talk on meta design. And the idea at Deconstruct, the theme was designing the future. But I was more interested in something rather than thinking about how we design the future, you've got to think very clearly about, well, who's doing the designing? And whose future is it anyway? Because the further apart those two things are, the less capable of the people are in the present, in the now, to design that future. So how might you design for design? What is design where you are designing not the final thing, but the ability for people to take that and do that? Secondly, I applied it to mechanics. So I was at Barcelona this year, a conference called I Am, where I met Martin from the conference incident. And that idea was sort of like the conference was on complexity and emergence and how the internet worked. And so I was really interested in sort of like, well, you've got all these different mechanics, these web mechanics that people use on different sites and services and products. But what's behind this? What is the mechanics of all these mechanics put together? And what does it do to us, and how do we interact with that? And just beginning to get into this sense of sort of like the meta mechanics of the internet, continually moving, always unexpected, often unintended. And at the end of that presentation, I think the night before I was due to give it, I was still writing it because that's how conference presentations work, I just threw in this slide, so strategy is dead, design appropriately. So just pushing against that idea of sort of like long 5-year strategies that you keep hammering away at, come what may, because the chief exec put it in a document and therefore that's still the strategy, that's still the thing we must reach for, the thing we must try and achieve. Martin and I talked about sort of like the idea of, so okay, so let's try this as a third act. Meta strategy. What is this idea of having a strategy of strategies? It's about moving objects, it's about layers, and it's about loops, which I shall hopefully unpack for you a bit today. End of prologue. So Jean Tingly was a Swiss artist who lived in France. He was part of the avant-garde movement in Paris, and he was a signatory of the New Realism movement. The thing he's most famous for is things like this: kinetic sculptures, I've never. This is much bigger than the actual real sculpture, which is weird in a presentation. But they are beautiful things to look at, to stand and just watch how all the things affect all the other things. But because it is built in physical space, it has limitations. And the limitations are that if you stare long enough, you can see how it works. It comes back round to the start and starts again, so that you start to learn the pattern. You start to look at things and go, oh, I see. So when that does that, this does this does this, and eventually that will come back round to there. Super, I've got it. I know the pattern. And that's good for us, because it's sort of like we like staring at things to work out how they work, because then we can go, oh, excellent, I know how that works now. I can now use this again and again and again. We are pattern-loving machines. This is in the Cosmocaixa Science Museum in Barcelona. And they have them in different museums across the world as well. But it's a giant pendulum which swings very slowly across the space, and every 5 or 6 minutes knocks one of these giant steel bars down with a really satisfying thudunk. The interesting bit is watching all the kids who stand there watching and watching and watching for the thing that they know is going to happen. And then the thing they know is going to happen happens, and they all cheer and shout and dance, and then they go back to watching, waiting for the thing that they know is going to happen to happen. They like the repeating patterns. It's a very satisfying thing. So when we think about what makes the internet go round, what are the patterns we can see? What are the things that are established that we go, oh, let's see if this thing's going to happen again? What are the mechanics underpinning it? So you can do a very long and dry Wikipedia description of mechanics, but I think mechanics is more usefully thought of as what happens to things when things happen to them. This is also, it's a brilliant science museum, let's be honest. You go to Cosmocaixa in Barcelona, all these shots are from there. So beginning to unpack the mechanics of the internet, what happens to things when things happen to them? There's a 2002 book by David Weinberger called Small Pieces Loosely Joined. It's his unified theory of the web. And he was talking, in the opening chapter, he's talking about his experience as an e-publisher. And the first time they suddenly got an idea of what was behind the internet was coming. Because they were building CD-ROM publication things. And they still had links in them, but they had decided where the links went. Suddenly when they started seeing free hyperlinks on the web, it scared them a bit. Because they were used to working in documents. And the thing about a document is once it's published, no one can change it except the original publisher. So they thought, we decide the order. We know what's going to happen here. And of course the web didn't work like that. The web was sort of like all these different things. So when their colleagues are going, who decides where that link goes? Somebody turned around and went, the guy who wrote it. It could be anyone. He's not an editor. It's very scary. And these things keep changing round and round and round. Suddenly all this movement makes the mechanics underpinning this thing very confusing if you're in that sort of like set understanding. So we, over the last 5 years, we've been thinking, how do you help people understand this? How do you help them get into a sort of like a way in which they can embrace this chaos rather than be scared of it? And what happened kind of by accident is we started working with playing cards. Initially just for one thing. We wanted people to draw pictures rather than write words. So we shifted away from post-it notes and biros and into blank playing cards and Sharpies to give people a more sort of like satisfying drawing experience. But what happened was that sort of like people started doing, so yes they drew, and yes that was really interesting, and that's what we wanted. But of their own accord, the people in various workshops started using the playing cards as playing cards. Because of course they would, because they knew what they were. And suddenly we had this system that would generate lots and lots and lots and lots of different movement. And it was in the movement, the continually re-examining things, that suddenly, just because of the mechanics of the cards, we were getting to interesting and new and very vibrant ideas because of the continually switching thing. And playing cards, it shouldn't have been a surprise that people would do with playing cards what people do with playing cards. Because they are, centuries old. The first idea, the first acknowledged history of playing cards. It emerges from 9th century imperial China. At the same time that they describe, the same time that they decide that scrolls are rubbish. Because the problem with a scroll is that like you've got a piece of information that's at the very far end. So you go, what's that piece of information? Oh, well, I'll roll it out. Right, I've got it. You roll it back up. What was it again? So they start chopping paper up into leaves and binding them together in books. But as soon as they start chopping them into separate pieces, they start turning them into games. They suddenly go, oh, this is quite an interesting interchangeable format for doing. So they start in paper, and then it moves into different forms as well. But what we now know as playing cards starts doing as many things did, travelling up through the trades routes, through Persia and India and into Europe in the 14th century. And then we get sort of like many, many different forms of cards, a long, deep cultural language. So we shouldn't have been surprised. We were stupid, in fact, to think that people wouldn't use playing cards for what people use playing cards for. But what was interesting was it wasn't just about the content of what was on the cards. It was the mechanics, the fact that they are cards that were giving people this new way to think about ideas that would live on the internet. Kickstarter's a really interesting place to look for card stuff. There are 2,337 successfully funded Kickstarter projects based on cards. We know because we counted last week. I say we, thank you, Fraser. And what's interesting is sort of like 20% of them, so like nearly 500 now, are not games. They're ideas. People are using this format to help people understand different concepts and different things of how to build or analyze or create things for a new age. They are work tools rather than just play tools. These card mechanics are just really useful because you can just go and suddenly create new context in the groups that you've got very quickly and very easily. And that generates something really interesting. It's just a small piece of maths magic. So John Wood at Goldsmiths calls it the creative quartet. If you have two things, you have at least one synergy between them. If you add another two things, the great thing about exponential maths is you don't just get two synergies, you have 6. And then if you add another 4 cards, you have 28. If you have another 4 cards, you get 66. Suddenly all of these combinations become possible. And this in cards is what we start to see as the shared mechanics between that and the internet. Suddenly you can use these to design ideas and structures and systems very quickly to help people understand the internet. I was sitting with a friend about 3 years ago using the cards with a group of people. And he was a deep coding guy. And he turned around to me halfway through the session. He's like, these people are writing code. So we're getting them to come up with ideas and put them in orders and structures and so on, and then reanalyze what they'd use. He's like, these people are writing code. They just don't know it yet. Because we've given it to them in a frame of reference that they're very interested in. Paul at Intercom says, we're currently witnessing a re-architecture of the web away from pages and destinations towards completely personalized experiences built on an aggregation of many individual pieces of content. So we see this in a lot of design patterns. We've moved away, like the Chinese did, was decided that scrolling is rubbish. Going up and down one big long web page is a terrible thing. Serve people that aggregation, individual pieces of content, which is what a hand of cards is. And latterly, what was interesting, because it was, once we started seeing this phenomenon, it was like, okay, so why? So that was a fortuitous accident, but why? Started reading a bit more of Seymour Papper's work, who was, some people know him, he died recently. Computer scientist, educator, behind One Laptop Per Child, but probably most famously for people of my generation, Logo, the turtle and the software. So what it would be is sort of like people would, children would be given a computer and one of these things, or maybe even just the computer in itself, and told, You've got to learn how to talk to this thing to help it draw shapes. So they had to learn the language, learn the code to make this thing move and draw the shapes that they wanted to draw. And what he said about the turtle was this: the turtle is a transitional object between the body, the self, and an abstract concept. It was the thing that you could bring into your world. To understand this abstract idea of maths and geometry, it was something that you could see and you could feel in the same physical presence yourself and understand the abstract thing that someone was trying to get you to learn. And perhaps that's what's going on by using cards in this format. It's the body and the self and the abstract concept of the internet which helps people understand the mechanics. So that's the first thing, moving objects. Second thing is about layers. So as all these objects are moving around, how do we start understanding the different levels and the different speeds of these things? It was one of these really fortuitous things happened to me 1 week about 2.5 years ago. It's two separate friends who live in different countries. I saw them both in London. And they don't know each other. But they both recommended me a book by Stuart Brand. And they were different books, written at different times. So it was one of those little serendipitous things. You go, well, there's got to be something in that. So I will read both books at the same time. If you'd been following Brand's career, you might have sort of like taken 5 years between books and not smashed them together like that. But just that sort of like that one act of serendipity meant it's all like, oh, he's got one trick. No, he doesn't really have one trick. But it was the same repeated idea. So in How Buildings Learn, so I think some of you will have definitely seen this. It's the shearing layers idea. He talks about how buildings have layers that move at different speeds. And this is the thing that allows them to absorb shocks and to change over time. Because if everything moved at the same speed and a shock came along, the whole construct would be broken. So if you imagine the site seldom or never really changes, unless it's London Bridge and some American buys it. The structure will change more slowly over time. The skin on the outside will change a bit more quickly than that. The services that are plumbed in will change more quickly than that, and so on and so forth, all the way down to the stuff that is on desks and tables and in drawers. That moves really quickly through a space. Then 5 years later, he repeats the thing, but starts talking about cultures and people. And says, well, nature is the slowest level of all, and culture, when you think about any group of people or organization, culture, he says, is the work of all people. So for a whole culture to change, it requires everyone to change. So which gives you some really good context when you're doing work with people who say, oh, we want to change the culture of the organization. And you go, well, you realize your governance layer will move more quickly than the culture you're trying to change, so you won't be here when you affect the change. What would you do in that case? And all the way up to fashion. So fashion is the thing that keeps things moving around and moving quickly. About both, he says, the quick processes provide originality and challenge, while the slow provide continuity and restraint. Because I'd read these two things in the same week, I had these two models, one round, one square, in my head. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe they link together. So maybe it's like a bike chain where you've got the cogs and the chain moving around it. So how might that work? So I spent far too long animating it in Keynote. So I'm going to show you it because I spent that much time animating it in Keynote. If you imagine sort of like the faster layers on top being the sort of, so this is the people, so the fast fashion on the inside to the slow culture on the outside, right at the heart. And then space, and by space, just abstracting that to mean that all physical things, all things that we have, that we touch, that we live in, that we drive. So if those are linked, we've got slow to slow and fast to fast. And what happens when it starts spinning is that fast fashion layer on the outside will move the fast stuff on the inside of buildings really quickly. Whereas the slow culture layer is the thing that drives the structure or even the site of a building, where an organization lives, perhaps in a city. So the fast is linked to the fast. It's all about originality and challenge. The slow is linked to the slow. So continuity and restraint. And I think, probably because I studied economics at university, every time I see stuff, you go, oh, I can make a chart or a matrix out of that. I can turn it into boxes. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Just that relationship. And we think, oh, what happens if you put that there? What's happening in the gearbox? What's happening there? Well, you've still got the people. Hello? People, fast, slow. And by people, fast, slow, we're thinking about culture. So for instance, if you're thinking about football, you might say, over here at the fast end, football is just, it can start as just a kickabout in the park with your family or friends, or kids' parties where you go to a place just for a couple of hours, or fundraisers or local teams, grassroots football, community programs, something into match officials, supporters clubs, official leagues, European competition, World Cup. So from fast to slow. And then space, fast to slow, where you might have, if you're just thinking about the Barcelona streets, everything from chalking in graffiti to street art, advertising, missing cat posters, murals, street signs, mosaics, all the way up to public amenities, cleaning, sculptures. Fast and slow, fast and slow. And so we have this link through the middle. The fast is linked to the fast and the slow is linked to the slow. And when Brand's talking about the layers, he said, all durable dynamic systems have this sort of structure. It's what makes them dynamic and robust. That's that line there. But given the chart, given it was generated like that, it created this empty space. And you start going, so what happens there? What happens in these spaces where these things collide? What happens when a gear jumps? And you know what happens when a gear jumps in your bike. You suddenly go, whoa. So what happens when you jump 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers? I think so up in that space where the originality and challenge of people, very small, fast, nimble groups of people meet big, slow, spatial infrastructure. That's where you suddenly get lots of people doing what they like to call disruption. And by disruption, they usually mean making lots of money at the expense of other people. But I'm more interested very, very quickly in this space down here. What happens? Because we haven't seen much down here, I don't think. And I've always wondered, well, what will emerge here? And I think the answer is what happens when a $49 billion, 21-year-old franchise invades your local bar. Or Pokemon Go, as it's known. Which I have been... this is all research, honest. This is just it's just research. It's just research. It's really interesting. It's really fucking interesting. Just beginning to get a sense of what are the questions that this asks. It asks questions like this. So suddenly you can visualize cultural deserts. This is where I live. There is nothing there. This is London. There is lots there. Does it exacerbate sort of like people flocking to metropolitan centres because it is reinforced to this idea that where you live in a town is shit? You should go and live in a city. It's physically agnostic. It makes no differentiation between some street art in Barcelona, which is no longer there, and a library. It's all the same, don't care. It's just the same sort of thing. It's temporally agnostic. It doesn't care that the festival that it's tagged doesn't happen 364 days a year. So when you turn up, oh, I wonder if that's there. Doesn't care. And then all other weird stuff. Just weird. Even to the extent, we were on holiday. So last week, and we just saw lots of people gathering down on the shore in Cornwall. So I wonder what they're looking at. And they were looking at a seal. There was a seal coming in. It was, oh, that's quite nice. They have a seal problem. Apparently the seals feed, and they've got a do not feed the seals sign up. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I just happened to open up Pokemon Go, and there's a fucking seal there. Do you know? Is this a seal conspiracy? It's like Hitchhiker's Guide, but with seals instead of dolphins. It raises lots of questions about what is actually What is it? What do we mean by here? What is here? To demonstrate, I've drawn you a Pikachu. Question. In fact, we'll do this as audience participation. Is it really here? So, for argument's sake, say this Pikachu had appeared on Pokemon Go. Hands up if you think it's really here. And hands up who thinks, therefore, that it isn't really here. And hands up if you didn't put your hand up. And hands up if you still didn't put your hand up. Aye. But I would say, if it isn't over here, and if it isn't over here, de facto it must be here. It must, because the satellite my phone tells the ground, says, well, the thing is really here. We've only made it appear here, which means that here is where the problems really start. Because you get these massive temporal spatial shocks. Have you seen any of the videos of people just sort of like traveling around San Francisco and places and suddenly descending on parks and going, ta-da, we're here, we're playing this thing? It was in Barcelona, and it was like suddenly there was lures set up and went to a public park, and every bench was occupied by Pokemon Go players. At what stage did the council provide more benches for Pokemon Go players? It starts affecting all the different layers. Pokemon Go begins wearing your city like an ill-fitting human suit. It doesn't quite work. It's messing with all the layers. It has this sort of like weird thing that is now putting in some sort of like nanny state instructions about don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But they know, right? I mean, we don't read the I agree things every time we update software, so why would we pay any attention to that? But you've got the opposite things, the really slow layers like government. This is the mayor of a village in Paris banning all Pokemon from the village. As of 2 weeks, they are all banned. I will have none of this. I am the mayor of a town in Paris. This is a bar in Barcelona, and I popped in to say to the guy, what? And he goes, well, it's just a joke. And I said, no, but it's a good joke, so why? He said, well, you walk around the city for the last 2 weeks, and you've got people go, this, marching up and down, and they step out in front of traffic, and they start coming into the bar when they don't want anything. It makes it harder to live here. I just lost my slides from down here. This is very professional. I think this has gone on standby. This is Julia. Hi. A round of applause for Julia, actually. It's coming. Oh, it's back. Thank you. The guy said, it makes it harder to live here. Pokemon Go makes it harder to live here. Who is Pokemon to decide that it makes it harder to live in every bar and village and town and city in the world? So we have to learn how to move differently in these volatile quadrants, which is where I got onto loops to finish us off. I've done a lot of thinking over the last couple of years, I think, about just design models. All design models seem to go left to right. It's like time is on the x-axis, and so it's dominant. It goes, well, we've got to move you through the thing as quickly as possible. But I was reading more recently about Colonel John Boyd, who's a fighter pilot. And he started moving out of being a fighter pilot and into working on strategy when he was sort of like in the mid-60s, early 70s, highlighting to the US Air Force that, you know what, maneuverability is better than speed. Previously, they were obsessed just with the speed of an aircraft, how quickly you can get it to go in one direction. Where he said, well, it's much better if you can make it more maneuverable. So rather than locking time on the x-axis, how do you make a design process more maneuverable? So Boyd's concept's called OODA loops, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. So you start here, observe, orient, decide, act. Was that a fly moving up there? Oh, interesting. And we could, the one that's most interesting is orient, but these are kind of obvious to you guys, I think. So observe, new information about changing environment, decide, form a hypothesis, act, test it, repeat. So that information, all the things that you do will always change the circumstances in which you work. But the most interesting thing he talks about is this idea of orient. So how do you create perspectives that match your reality? So thinking back to Trisha's thing, perspective shift. How do you continually create perspectives that match the reality that you are working in or the people that you are working for? So when Boyd was talking about orienting, there's 4 key things I think we can take from what he had in that box. So one's new information, second is analysis and synthesis, the third is previous experience, and the fourth is cultural traditions. All of this stuff packs into how you orient, how you create a perspective that matches the reality around you. And 2 interesting things. One, you've got layers there, from the slow to the fast again. But second, 2 are about the present and 2 are about patterns from the past. We get back into the pattern problem. One example becomes a lesson becomes a method becomes a practice becomes a doctrine becomes death. Oh, I've got one trick. I'll just repeat that one trick. We get hypnotized by... I want to ask Trisha if this works with Pokemon, because that would be quite useful. We've got to learn to break our patterns by giving ourselves lots of alternatives, lots of models, lots of strategies, lots of things that we can default to go, this time, given the circumstances, it should be this. Papert talks about this too. Anything is easy if you can assimilate it to your collection of models, multiple models, meta-strategy, a strategy of strategies. There is no correct vantage point, no single vantage point. So this statement, strategy is dead, design appropriately. The more important part of it is design appropriately. What is right for now? What do we have in the toolkit that we can apply to this circumstance and this circumstance only? Because when we act on it, it will change the system in which we work. So I'm running a workshop, so hello to the people who come to the workshop on Thursday. On this. So this is just a format we use based on a couple of these things. Let's call it 9-box, a universal agility map. So you recognize people and space. So just a way of breaking us off that x-axis design time thing and just sort of like playing more usefully and appropriately with it. So if we break this into 3, we have team. So the people who are working on the thing all the time. Who is it that are working on it? As we go out to more people, it becomes qualitative. And qualitative is about asking users, critics, other people in the company, other people who've got a viewpoint that you don't about it. What are we doing? And then out here it's quantitative. And this is data that you go and get specifically around the thing. It's not just data that comes in. There's so much data around. We're data rich but judgment poor. We're just going, oh yeah, we'll just use all this data. It's no, use the right data. Go and specifically get it. I'm an ex-quant market researcher, so get proper data, people. But these 3 things, you're sort of like you're scaling up the number of people that you're getting an opinion from. And then up the side, we're talking about sketch. So the lowest level of how do we make a thing. Scaffold. So when you sort of move out of sketch, you get into, okay, so what does it become? What does it become next? We call it scaffolding because it's that thing when you walk down a street and you pass a building that's covered in scaffolding and you don't know what it's going to be yet, but you get an idea of the shape and size and impact it will have in your life. And then you get up into structure. So we always start down here, sketching at a team level. Ask, so what should we do? We've done that thing. Improve or share? Improve it? Do we know enough to take it to a next level? Or actually, do we need to share it? Do we need to talk to people, to show people something, to get more information about it? Each space is self-contained. You just start moving to the right, most appropriate space. But you can also move backwards or down. It's just like snakes and ladders. You're working your way to the most appropriate and right way of approaching something. So different projects have different journeys. Time is an output, not an input. How long something takes is the right amount of time for it to take. It's not the thing that you must dogmatically follow all the way through. You will find an example of this chart in your workbook. My mum's a primary school teacher. Turn to page 17 in the workbook. Just explore some projects that you have worked on. So very quickly to finish, as Johanna is going, are you finished yet? The sorts of things we have been sort of like piling all this stuff into, just two very quick examples. One's for Konica Minolta, which Johanna mentioned before. The problem, we're working with the R&D and innovation team, and in a business like Konica Minolta, who make big business IT electronic machines, it takes a very long time for that stuff to hit here. 3, 4, 5 years. So how can we use more of this stuff over here more immediately? So we designed a system that actually took all of the stuff inside the innovation and R&D teams and put it in the hands of the client, but just in movable, layered card form. And essentially started building new technology with clients by saying, how would you put this stuff together? What sort of needs do you have? Can we work with the people who you are supplying this information technology for? And what it does, you start shortcutting this thing. So without having to build it, you just generate lots of potential futures, which then come back to the innovation R&D team. So instead of building that for the next 5 years, you should build some of this. The second example is about breaking out of this idea of the customer journey for a client. So a customer journey is great. It can be a very logical thing for a simple product. But if you are a big complex company, you get lots of different people calling your customer service center to go, I've got this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. No one customer journey fits it, and there's no point trying to force everyone through it. So instead, we talked to them about the island. We said, so imagine everyone who calls your company or emails your company is actually, you find them on this island off the mainland of where the rest of your company operates. And they don't know how they got there, they're very annoyed by it, and they just want to get back to the mainland. Build me from the materials we provided for the team workshop, build me this island. Build me the sorts of territories and the sorts of places you find them and the routes back to the mainland. And so we've been developing it now as a system where the base level of the island is the elements driven by seasonal data. So we say sort of like generally speaking, you have this many problems of this type, this many problems of this type, this many problems of this type. Local teams can build specific structures on top of those to say these are our regional or local problems that we have. But then we use it at the very top layer as a daily story mechanism. So something that people stand around and say, what's going on in our company at the moment? So they can continually just sort of like bring qualitative and quantitative data together and build new and different strategies to deal with stuff. So, design for meta strategies, but moving objects, but layers and loops.
Thank you. Now, I love how you cunningly built in that thing which said that a thing takes as long as it needs to take.
Yeah.
So we're fine. I do want to say, in case you need to pick up kids or something, we're going to use 5 more minutes. But if you need to run off, try and do so discreetly. I think it's worth it to spend these 5 minutes. 2 of which, John, I will spend with you.
Hi.
I have a question. I have so many questions. This is awesome, and I'm so happy we have this on video because it feels like I need to watch this 10 times because everything is shifting in my brain. But my immediate question is, one of the things I think a lot of us use strategy for, or used to use strategy for before hearing your talk, is to find some ways to formalize our values and our goals in relationship to each other. And I noticed that you're not talking about goals. These movements still need some direction. Is there a phase where we decide where we want to be at or what we want to be in the world? And how does that relate to this?
So in fact, can I click back to the thing, I wonder? I can't remember how far away it is.
I'm referring you now to page 15 in your workbooks.
Yeah. So if you think about up here,
yeah.
It's about you set a North Star for a project up here and go, yeah, we know you want to get to there, and that's fine. But let's have some sort of like intermediate sort of like encapsulation of what there might be, but then work one box at a time. Because undoubtedly, as soon as we step into the first box, whichever direction we go, that's going to change. So sort of like having something to start with is the vital thing, but also being open to changing the thing that you start with. As soon as one of your customers tells you something that you hadn't even thought when your internal team are putting something together.
So then the role of your values as an organization, whatever those values are, could totally be just make as much money as possible. Those are also values. That's how you judge the results of each box, basically. Those are the parameters in which you weigh your success.
There's different ways of building parameters around it. So you can do it on cost. So you can say, how do we do, what's the most cost efficient way? Because you can basically size up each of these activities by sort of like, so that's low level qualitative research. This is getting data on sketch level things. So it might be fake door stuff on Google or whatever, sort of like just inviting people through to products. This is sort of like initial prototyping in whichever material and so on. But you can scope each of those boxes so that you have, and I think this is what Boyd hints at, so that you have multiple options. Wherever you are, observe everything that's going on, orient, so think of all the potential different models that you might have at any one place, and then decide and act, but then repeat the thing again.
Once again, I'm so pleased that we have this video, because I've realized it's not just about us in this room. Like, we're going to have to go back and talk to our colleagues about this stuff as well. Thank you so much, John V. Willshire. The clicker. And thank you.